Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here in Stockholm. Thank you to Saint-Gobain for organising today and for inviting me, to Benoit, Thierry and Ellen for having the foresight to get a group of people together to discuss what I think is a really important topic for the construction industry globally. And I think that's really the context for what I'm going to talk about here. Even though my particular experience is from the UK, and as Lars said, I've been doing a lot of work with the UK government over the last 18 months or so. I've been travelling a lot, and I've been very lucky to go to all parts of the world talking about modernisation in the industry and sharing the lessons from the UK. And what is very, very clear is that everything we are experiencing in the UK is being experienced in most Western economies across the world at the moment. So I'm going to talk about what I believe is construction's burning platform. I'm going to explain what I mean by that in terms of the challenges I think we face as an industry that we have not faced before. We work in a difficult industry, but I believe we have some very different challenges coming forward now that are going to force us to have to think very differently about production. Just very quickly, a bit about me. So I've been in the construction industry for 30 odd years. I trained in a very bizarre profession that we only have in the UK called quantity surveying. So I'm a chartered surveyor, which is primarily involved in the commercial management of construction projects. I've also delivered construction and project management, so I've been pretty heavily involved for most of my career in strategic planning of procurement, how you organise projects, how you deliver them commercially, how you deal with risk. So unfortunately, I've seen the industry at its very worst, because lots of what I've had to deal with over the course of my career has been very difficult. We work in a very adversarial industry, very transactional, so lots of my thinking and my overview of the industry has come from a lot of personal experience, as well as learning what's happening at a macro level. So I'm going to talk for 20 minutes or so, and I'm going to start with some background context. In late 2016, I published a report called Modernise or Die, which was the report I was asked to write by the UK government. The government wanted to know what the issues were in the UK that were going to prevent it from delivering 250,000 new homes a year. And that's the residential requirement we have in the UK. Since 2016, the UK government has increased that to 300,000 homes per year. We're currently building about 200,000 homes per year, so we are a lot short of where we need to be. And the government asked me to look at production capacity. They wanted me to look at the industry structurally to see what the issues were and how we would resolve them. And the findings of my report, lots of the features that I found that exist in our industry have been covered many, many, many times before in lots of different reports, and are very common to lots of global markets. And I'm not going to go through all of those points there. Many of those issues you will recognise as being features of the construction market in wherever your home sector is, in whatever part of the world. The whole issue about productivity, fragmentation, poor image. These are all things that hopefully you will recognise. There was one issue, though, that for me, very early in my research, I realised looked increasingly ominous and a disturbing feature for the future, which is that one: workforce size and demographics. And through looking at the data, looking at the census data in the UK, looking at the ageing profile of our workforce, it was clear that that issue, combined with the industry's poor image in terms of how it competes in the talent market for young people coming into our industry, was starting to combine to create an unprecedented pressure on resourcing going forward. And our industry traditionally is very resilient. Construction is mostly characterised by discretionary spend. High-value capex is something that is highly linked to economic cycles. So when there's a downturn, construction gets hit more than most. And when there's an upturn, pressure on the industry is greater than many other industries. And that has led the industry in many, many countries, certainly in the UK, but I believe it to be true of many other Western economies, to become very resilient. It hires construction workers, it fires construction workers, it flexes the size of its production base in tune with economic cycles. And that flexibility of workforce has been something the industry has come to rely on. And my assertion is that that is no longer something that can be relied on. Because what we're now seeing is that the number of people retiring every year and leaving the workforce is a multiple of the number of people coming into the industry every year. And in the UK, we have something called Brexit, which we've brought upon ourselves, and I'm not going to dwell on that. But if you bear in mind that in London, for instance, 40 to 50% of all construction workers on sites in London are from Europe and from non-UK countries. We have a big problem in terms of the resiliency of our workforce. So the ability to hire, to fire, to bring people from overseas to do work that actually indigenous workers increasingly do not want to do. So youngsters now, we are facing a societal change where young people want to work with technology. They don't want to work on cold, wet building sites doing hard manual labour, which is the characteristic that is portrayed in our industry. We have some big problems ahead. And I don't think that the UK's issues are isolated. So even though we have Brexit as an additional risk, the demographic change that we're seeing in the UK is shared through many, many countries. In my travels across the world, it is a recurring theme that most construction labour markets are under pressure in a way that we have not seen before. So what that does, it means that we have declining resiliency. It means that the focus on productivity improvement has never been greater. And that is why I believe we have a burning platform. And the combination of those two issues, ageing workforce, demographic profile, and kids not seeing construction as an aspirational career, is the thing that's different this time. Construction has had lots of reports done in terms of how it needs to improve, how it needs to be better, how it needs to be more like manufacturing. And we've always had a choice in the past. We could either do that or do that. I don't think we have a choice anymore. And that's why the timing of where we are at the moment, combined with the unprecedented technology opportunity, which I'll talk about shortly, makes this a very different time in our industry's evolution, I believe, and either a massive risk or a great opportunity, depending how we want to proceed. If we carry on as we are, I set out a series of statements to the UK government as to what will happen. One is our labour force will go into structural decline, and I suggested in 1 decade, in 10 years, we would lose 20 to 25% of the entire UK workforce. You go to Japan, where I was 2 weeks ago in Tokyo, they have lost 30% of their construction workforce in 15 years through ageing. So this demographic issue is not theoretical. It's proven in other countries where certainly Japan is one of the more progressed aged populations, and it has affected their construction workforce more than any other sector because of its construction reliance on labour. So this is very real. The quality of new labour coming into the market is being reduced. So it's not just headcount, it's the calibre of labour that's coming in through the level of training that's being provided, or the fact that there's a reliance on migrant labour, unskilled labour coming in. We have a shrinking pool of experienced people to transfer knowledge, less and less people to teach others how to do things. We have a tiered contracting system in the UK. I believe it's the same here in the Nordics, and I've seen it in other European countries where main contractors control subcontractors. Main contractors have lost control over subcontracting, and in turn, subcontractors have lost control over their labour force. So the ability to control risk is now much, much less than it has been. We've seen designers being de-skilled through the procurement routes that we've adopted. So once upon a time, architects and engineers could design everything, even the nuts and bolts on the scheme. Certainly in the UK, we've seen an erosion of those skills and more focus on front-end designs, with the detailed design now being done in the supply chain, which is fine, but actually if you then use adversarial procurement routes, it doesn't bring together the whole design in a very efficient way. We're seeing increased litigation and project failures, some of them in the UK very high profile, and we're going to see more. We're seeing ongoing commercial failures of businesses, which I'll come back to in a second. We're seeing massive construction price volatility, tender price inflation, has always been volatile, but we're seeing it even more volatile than ever now because labour is inelastic. So the ability for labour force to go up and down is much more reduced. And against all of that, we're seeing this massive disruption starting to appear around the fringes of our industry. New players, people from outside construction, looking at construction as one of the biggest opportunities to disrupt a sector that hasn't been touched for 100 years. All of a sudden, technology is the enabler that will make things different. So you would think, against that backdrop, that necessity to do something, the industry would be rushing to change itself and realise that it has to do something differently. Not really. The one thing, though, that I think is going to change us and force us to have to do things differently, though, is discontent. And what do I mean by discontent? Well, there's two different types of discontent we're seeing. Certainly in the UK, in the last 18 months, we have seen a raft of large contractors lose money at a time when the UK construction industry has never been busier. So if you can't make money in a climate where CapEx is growing, where the construction industry is buoyant, then that indicates there's something seriously wrong with the system. And that culminated at the beginning of this year with the second largest contractor in the UK, Carillion, going bust. Fairly unprecedented. Carillion's demise accelerated within a space of 6 months. And what it did, it put into focus the fragility of the contracting model at a time when labour resilience has never been weaker. So the ability of a contractor to take risk on large projects when there's not enough skilled labour, and it's not just site labour, it's professionals, it's designers, engineers, and project managers, ultimately means that people start making mistakes, projects lose money, and it ends in failure. And that's what happened with Carillion. Carillion was a massive shock in the UK. It sent ripples around the world. I was in Australia and New Zealand about a month after it happened, and it was being talked about on the other side of the world. And that's because the issues that Carillion have faced are being faced in other countries, and this risk issue about delivering projects and making money is a common issue. And what's really interesting is that what I think that's going to lead to is what I call a new paradigm, where the contracting world and the consulting world will start to come together. Contractors will take less risk. They'll be forced to, otherwise they'll go bust. And consultants, some consultants, will decide to take a bit more risk, combined with industrialized production techniques. Because if you can de-risk production by using manufactured, prefabricated components, then consultants will see themselves as a delivery vehicle. And you've seen that through a series of announcements that have been made, certainly in the UK, even in the last few months. Costain, large contractor in the UK, deciding to become more of a consultant, using technology services and advisory services, not taking lump sum risk anymore. Companies like AECOM and Arcadis deciding to enter prefabricated construction and become a delivery vehicle. So all of a sudden, the world is changing in terms of how things are being done and who's doing them. There's also a big issue we have in the UK with the consumer. So the consumer, whether it be house builders and people buying homes, apartments and houses, or whether it's government departments building schools, or whether it's major infrastructure projects like Crossrail, all of a sudden, the end consumer is starting to become more vocal. It's not acceptable anymore for the construction industry to fail. In the past, it's been accepted. The construction industry has not delivered, and life moves on. Crossrail, last week, there was an announcement made in the UK that Crossrail will be nearly a year late. It's going to be a 500 million to £1 billion over budget. And that was on a project that was seen for many, many years as being a poster child for a highly innovative project, lots of R&D, lots of great stuff being done. But when that job became very labour-intensive fit-out project, because there's lots of stations that have had to be fitted out with lots of labour, it has been exposed to the same issues that every other construction project in the UK has been. Not the ability to get labour, not enough people, high wages, poor quality, and you have the same problems happening. So where are the solutions and where are the opportunities? So for me, this starts with looking at where does our industry get it wrong? And the 4 things on the right-hand side, for me, summarise everything that's wrong with our industry. We design every single project from scratch. No commonality. Everything's bespoke. We rely too much on site labour, thinking that's the only way of doing things when it's not. We're too fragmented down the value chain, from the client to a tier 1 contractor to a tier 2, a tier 3, tier 4. Every level there's inefficiency and waste and transactional costs. And we're horizontally fragmented. We work in silos. We've got designers, constructors, trade specialists, all working across a horizontal silo structure. And the only way to address that is two things. One is we have to move more towards industrialized manufactured construction, which will deal with the bespoke design and the labour intensity. And we have to reintegrate our procurement models. Move away from transactional procurement, move towards integrated alliance, collaborative, partnered working. And we have to wrap that with digital. Because the one thing that's different now is that we can do all of this with some fantastic, unprecedented digital tools that enable manufactured construction, industrialized production, enable integrated procurement to happen with a digital wrapper. Where we've been in the past hasn't necessarily been that successful. In the UK, we have had a form of mandate of BIM, and most of you will be aware of BIM. Hasn't worked that well, if I'm perfectly honest, in terms of its take-up in the UK. It's been highly variable. The big problem with how BIM has been applied in the UK, certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, is that it's all been about digital design. The front end of schemes now are being digitally designed routinely. Three-dimensional models are being created, they're being clash detected, they're being federated. But then we're overlaying that into an analog procurement and on-site construction phase. So actually the digital thread is diminishing as we go into buying the job, into building the job on site, because we're reliant on soldier ant labour on site working off analog drawings, with tape measures, with angle grinders, with sledgehammers. There's no digital verification of what's happening. What's happening in the design is only being checked against digital scans of what's being delivered on site in terms of how far out things were. The digital verification is not being driven. And that's where prefabrication has the ability to make a difference. Industrialized production that relies on digital fabrication that can then be better verified in terms of taking that thread all the way through to completion. And I think what's interesting is some of the organisational models that we're starting to see are moving back to a vertically integrated structure. So the resiliency I spoke about in terms of subcontracting has been a feature of the UK market and many others for 30 odd years. We're now seeing certain organisations realise they cannot control that risk anymore. They need to control the outcome. They need to reintegrate. Or new businesses are starting up, such as Katera, that many of you will have heard about from the US, that are end-to-end. They're basically a designer. They're actually a developer. They're a designer, they're a manufacturer, they're an installer, and they can operate the assets at the end. And in the UK, we have a couple of examples of that model being adopted. Legal & General, which is a big investor, an institutional fund in the UK, has set up its own manufacturing plant, one of the biggest in Europe, 600,000 square feet factory, delivering 5,000 to 6,000 units a year in residential modules. It's a developer, it's a manufacturer. It will hold the units for rent. It's actually retaining the assets. Berkeley is a big house builder in the UK, building a factory as we speak just outside London, because it doesn't see route to labour in the London market in the future. It has to increase productivity and quality improvement through manufacturing. And there's others that are still setting up, and it's all very quiet and under radar at the moment. And one of the things that is, going back to the point about consumerism, is that I expect the industry in the future, construction industry in the future, to be much more consumer focused, driven by the fact that consumers are going to start rating who does what. So the TripAdvisor culture, the Euro NCAP type approach to everything that's out there gets a rating. I think that's going to come to construction. It will come to consultants, contractors, specialists. People will leave feedback in an open data environment. It will be readily accessible. So everyone's got to up their game. Our industry has to start delivering at a better level to enable consumers to have confidence in it. Otherwise, those people that are not delivering won't get, the phone will stop ringing and they won't get any more work. And that sounds rather drastic, and it sounds something that could be seen to be quite difficult for various companies to deal with, but I think if, as an industry, we're going to be a high-performing 21st century industry, we have to get used to this, like every other sector has. The productivity debate I've already spoken about. The ageing workforce debate is driving, improving our productivity in a way that I don't believe we've seen before. If you look at, this is McKinsey data, there's a spread of where everyone is, but in broad terms, at $25 an hour, our industry is woefully unproductive. And the only way we're going to move things forward is to reduce the amount of labour per unit of work delivered. Study that I think this was released last week, I've picked this up, a Danish university has done a study looking at a particular scheme that worked out that 2/3 of every day on site is wasted through site operatives. And this is a study done by the UK government. Of every pound sterling spent on UK infrastructure projects, only 51 pence ends up in the final asset. The rest of it is waste, transactional costs, overheads, risk transfer. So there's so much to go out in our industry, it's unbelievable. Even if we go for 10% of what's available, it will be transformative in a multi-billion pound industry. And the ways in which we're starting to think about that in the UK, construction as manufacturing is a term that's being used a lot at the moment in the UK. Not necessarily prefabrication. Prefabrication in the UK has some negative connotations from the history, and we have a term called prefab, and prefab in the UK is associated with poor quality building after the Second World War. So we tend to use slightly different terms. I know prefab is very much in common language in Europe, and I've got no hesitation in using that here because it doesn't mean the same thing in the UK. But manufacturing principles, not necessarily volumetric modular, but it might be sub-assemblies, it might be consolidated components, it could be 2D panelised systems, could be 3D volumetric, full volumetric, mini volumetric. But thinking differently, creating platform design as well. So what happens in automotive sector where you have a platform with common components and you mass customise around is something that the UK market is thinking quite seriously about at the moment. Combine that with the power of artificial intelligence and iterative AI-based BIM, Dynamo and Grasshopper and programs like that, you get into the world of linking automated design into high speed design optimization, which, if you look at what this company has done, which is a company called Van Wijnen, some of you might have heard of these, they're a Dutch developer contractor, have linked artificial intelligence-based design with a product platform, in this instance timber-framed construction components. They can look at a site, evaluate a site, optimize a site, build it based on a product platform, press a button, send an order to a factory, automatically get a planning consent, deliver on site in a matter of weeks. That end-to-end industrialization of the process is technically what's possible now at scale from SME to large contractor. This is not just about size of business. These technology platforms are available to all. And if we can move our industry more towards where automotive has got itself in terms of mass customization, that's when we start to prove that we are fit for purpose industry. So the biggest investment many people make in their lives is buying a home. If you're not renting, it's buying a home. And are we able to deliver this level of choice in home building or apartment construction? Not at the moment. But if we can use digital tools to link digital design to customization, then this becomes a very real possibility. And I believe there's two aspects of technology that will change the game in construction. One is artificial intelligence, and the other is augmented reality. Not virtual reality, augmented reality. AI is going to affect all sectors. All industrial sectors will be transformed by AI. It's only now starting to be talked about, but I've seen some of what's coming in our industry, and it is truly transformative in consulting, in contracting. I would urge you all to Google a firm called Doxel, D-O-X-E-L. It's a US startup in California. That's the screenshot on the left there. They have devised an artificial intelligence-led platform that uses LiDAR scanning of delivered construction on site, combined with drones and an automated robot that goes onto a construction site and assesses what work's been done, whether it's dimensionally in tolerance, and can automate with blockchain ultimately, and distributed ledger technology payment to all of the trade contractors who've done that work. No humans involved. On the right, augmented reality. Why do I say augmented reality? Because this is how we're going to open up the construction workforce on the site to digital verified thread. So when construction workers at the workplace know where things go, where they see in their field of vision where things are fixed, when we deal with some of the technical challenges around what's known as large volume metrology, which is spatial positioning on large construction sites where people can use HoloLens or whatever to know exactly where things go, and they can video what's being done for verification, we change the game. And that work is happening in the UK. I know it's happening in other countries as well. But these two things, for me, are the game changers in a way we haven't seen before. And I'll close just with two very quick examples of how policy is making a difference as well. So the UK government has woken up to the fact that the construction industry needs to improve. And if it doesn't, UK government is not going to get economic growth, it's not going to get home building, it's not going to get infrastructure construction at the level that it wants. So there's a whole series, and I'm not going to go through all of these, of different publications that have been made. There's a lot of policy announcements that have been made. The government in the UK has committed its 5 biggest spending government departments to use modern methods of construction from 2019. Billions of pounds worth of construction for schools, hospitals, Ministry of Defence assets, transportation, prisons will be built using prefabrication. So government's the biggest client in the UK of the industry, and it's decided to use its own purchasing power to stimulate and drive change in the industry. So policy is being used as a strategic initiator of change in the construction industry. And then at a city level, London is deciding to do the same thing. So London has a series of policy documents. London's got a big housing problem. It needs to build 60,000 homes a year. It's building about 30 at the moment. And it's decided the only way it's going to do that, because the workforce is so constrained, is to look at industrialized construction as a way of doing that. So it's starting to make commitments in policy to increasing what's known as the pre-manufactured value, the percentage of schemes that are pre-manufactured in prefabbed. So a typical scheme in the UK at the moment is 40% pre-manufactured. The rest of it's labour. So there's an intent in London to increase that to 50%, and you'll see much more about pre-manufactured value in the future. London's already set up its own modular housing company, across 16 of the biggest London boroughs, and they're buying thousands of units a year of modular construction. Piece of work going on at the moment that my business is involved with, which is to create a manufactured housing design code for London so that we start to aggregate spend. So architects and designers know what's out there in terms of manufactured products. They can design for manufacture and assembly using this design code that the London Mayor is going to put out there. And he's going to mandate it for the affordable housing programme to a large degree as well. And then lastly, all of this needs skills. It needs new skills, digital skills. It needs assembly skills, logistics skills. So the Mayor has decided to run his own construction academy programme to drive those new skills into the market, so everything he's doing on policy can be delivered on the ground through running those courses in colleges and universities. So some interesting takeaways there. So perhaps, that's the Moore's Law. So many of you will have heard of Moore's Law and the doubling of processor speed every 2 years. The pace of change is phenomenal. Maybe we've just started that journey. Thank you for listening. Thank you.